Hi, this is Seven Daughters and Seven Sons, Part 3, Chapter 4. About 6 or 8 weeks after I had told my father that I loved a man, a particularly persistent suitor bribed his way past Salih and Muzin. My father was at the shop, and when they told me the suitor was from Orontes, I agreed to meet him. I veiled my face and received him in the second courtyard, keeping both Salih and Muzin beside me. He bowed as he stood before me. "Peace be with you, honored lady," he said in a deep, pleasant voice. He was no longer young, but he was tall and straight, with ruddy skin, sharp blue eyes, and a thick dark beard streaked with gray. "I have traveled far to bring you greetings today." "And to you, peace," I returned. "Please, make yourself comfortable." I gestured toward the rug opposite the one on which I was seated. "Salih, fetch some yogurt." Salih entered the house quietly. "I'm honored that you have received me," the man said. "I understand it isn't your custom." "Well," I replied, "you've come from far away. It seemed the least I could do. I didn't think your journey should be entirely in vain." "It won't be in vain," he said confidently. "You'll return with me to Orontes as my bride." I was tempted to snort, but I restrained myself. "Why should I?" I asked. "Because I love you," he replied. "And I'll teach you to love me." He smiled suggestively and shrugged his shoulders lightly. He was telling me that women found his blue eyes irresistible. I sighed. When he had first walked into the courtyard, so upright and handsome and clearly no mere boy, I'd hoped that he would be the one to have something different to say. I should have known better. Still, I wasn't ready to send him away. I was curious. I had been courted by countless suitors from Baghdad and from Aleppo and from Damascus, but this was the first to come to me from so far away as Orontes. "Are you in Baghdad simply to call on me, or did other business bring you here?" "To call on you only, fair lady," he replied. "Why else? For a native of Orontes, Baghdad holds no wonders. But you'll see that for yourself when you get there." "How did you hear of me, all the way in Orontes?" I asked. My question seemed to surprise him. "But lady, surely you know that you're famous. Your story is told in bazaars and khans in every city, from the Persian Gulf to the sea." Now I was surprised. "Surely not," I demurred. "I speak the truth," the man said. "Your servant goes to the bazaar. He talks to men who've crossed the desert with caravans. He'll tell you that what I say is true." I turned toward Muzin. He nodded. "Lady, our brother from Orontes is right. You're famous everywhere. Such things as you have done cannot be kept secret." "What do they say of me?" My face warmed with a rush of blood, and I was grateful for the veil that covered my embarrassment. The man from Orontes answered, "They tell the whole story. How you acquired a fortune in business and then came back to the city to revenge yourself on the cousins who had insulted you in the days when you were poor. They say, too, that you're as beautiful as you're clever. Naturally," he added complacently, "when I heard the tale, I came as quickly as I could. If I heard it in Orontes, they've heard it in all the other ports, too. You'd be best off marrying me immediately. Otherwise, you'll be so besieged with suitors, you'll go out of your mind. It'll be more than you and your poor father can handle." "I've been besieged already," I informed him firmly. "We've handled it so far. I dare say we can continue to manage." I rose from my seat. "I thank you for the honor you've done me," I said, "but I have no desire to marry you. No desire whatsoever. You may go now." He remained where he was. I must speak with your father first, he said. It is for him to dismiss me, not you. I shook my head. In spite of all that he'd heard, he still didn't understand. Sully came into the courtyard then, carrying a tray. Our visitor will not be taking refreshment after all, I said. Please, Sully, Musin, see him to the gate, and then return here. I want to talk to you. I told you, the man from Orontes began, loudly. I told you I'm not ready to... But he never finished his sentence. Sully grabbed one of his forearms, and Musin the other. They lifted him to his feet, and before he realized what was happening to him, he was pressed through the Iwan and out of my sight. He was through the gate nearly as quickly, for I had barely time to throw the stifling veils off my face before Sully and Musin were back in the courtyard. I confronted them immediately. You've gossiped about me, I accused. You've sat in khans with travelers and told them all my story. Who gave you leave to talk about me as if I were a public spectacle? Immediately, they both fell to their knees, their arms stretched out in front of them, their foreheads touching the ground. Oh, stop it, I cried, losing patience. Don't grovel, just tell me the truth. Sully remained prone before me. Musin sat up on his haunches and spoke for both of them. We wouldn't lie to you, lady, he said. We never have, and we won't start now. If we take a bribe, it's only because it's so large that it is irresistible to poor men like us. Forgive us for that, lady. Have I ever mentioned it? I asked. I understand. What would have been the point of your leaving Tira with me, if not for an opportunity to make your fortune? But what has that to do with telling my stories to strangers? I wasn't the first to speak, Musin said, his face serious, his eyes looking directly into mine. I swear by my father's head I wasn't the first, and neither was Sully. I swear by my father's head, Sully echoed, his voice muffled by the pavement. But, Musin added, how could such a story as yours be kept secret? I began pacing up and down the courtyard, speaking as much to myself as to Musin. The fact that I'm rich, of course I understand all Baghdad would know that. The way we live makes it no secret. But the marks my cousins bear? The way they acquired them? How did that come to be learned? They would never speak of it, that's certain. Their servants wouldn't either, because a master's disgrace always reflects on those in his employ. Isn't that true, Musin? I asked, pausing before him. Yes, lady, it's true as the sun. Then, Musin, I continued sternly, my hand gripping his shoulder, it must have been the servants in this house who spread the tale, and they must have spoken of it not only to citizens of Baghdad, but to traveling merchants and to strangers. That wasn't right. I never meant for my cousin's shame to be known to the entire world. It was always enough for me that I knew of it, that my parents and my uncle knew of it. Quite enough. Musin sighed. Lady, he said, if the servants in this house speak of the matter, it's because the chief of this house spoke of the matter. When he told the story, it seemed to the servants it was meant to be spoken of. My father? My father. It was a thought that had never occurred to me. Although I knew my uncle had tormented him over the years, I'd always thought that my gentle father was cut from a different cloth than the rest of us. And though I knew he took a certain inevitable pleasure in the fact that his family had bested his brothers, I knew the pleasure was mixed with regret at my single state. I couldn't picture his gossiping about my uncles and my cousin's discomfort. But Musin loved my father almost as much as he loved me. He wouldn't say anything about him that wasn't true. All right, Musin, Sully, I continued quietly. I accept your explanation. I forgive you. Later, I would get to the bottom of the matter. I turned toward the house. I'll rest in my room for a while. Go now and watch the gate. When my father comes home, tell me. I went to see him as soon as I heard that he was in the house. He sat in the courtyard, telling his beads, as he usually did while he waited for supper. I was very angry. He could see it in my face. "Why, daughter," he said, in his usual calm, easy tone. "What's happened to you? Your face looks like a storm cloud." "A suitor came to me today," I said. "You shouldn't receive them. That's my task." "It's not the suitors," I returned impatiently. "I'm over being angry at them." "Oh, that's something," he replied mildly. "It was where he was from. He was from Orontes." "Orontes?" His forehead wrinkled. "What do you have against Orontes? You've never even been there." "Neither have I, of course. But I've heard it's a beautiful city, and so far away. Farther than any city you have visited." "That's the point, father. How did a man from Orontes come to hear of me?" My voice was as accusing as a judge's. "Not only of me, but of all my cousins, too, and their disgrace? How, father, did I come to be the subject of common gossip, worldwide common gossip, if such a thing can be imagined?" My father didn't appear disturbed. "Not gossip, daughter," he said, "unless the stories Scheherazade told are gossip. Perhaps if we'd known the people those stories are about, we'd call them gossip too. Your story is a tale like those, passed from one teller to another. How could such things as you have done be kept secret?" "I told no one," I retorted. "You can be sure my uncle and my cousins didn't. I thought you were above such pettiness. I'm disappointed." My father snorted. "What makes you think I'm any better than you are? I'm not, that's certain. But I didn't tell your story to make my nephews and you the subject of idle gossip. I told it for a reason. I hear you, sometimes, weeping in the night, and I see your eyes, sometimes, staring into the distance, and I know you're far away from us, in another place. I am a father. Am I to hear and see such things and do nothing about them?" As usual, his calm, affectionate voice dissipated my temper. It wasn't easy to be angry at my father. Even my mother always had difficulty maintaining righteous indignation before his quiet reasonableness. I took his hand. "But father," I said softly, "I don't understand how telling the whole tale to strangers from caravans who come into the shop will do me or anyone else any good at all." "Oh, good will come of it, my daughter. Wait and see." His hand squeezed mine. "You may know all there is to know about making money, but I've lived longer than you, and I know a lot more than you about the mysteries of the human heart. Good will come from it, mark my words." Then he laughed loudly, joyfully, without even a tinge of melancholy. "Besides, my daughter, how could such a thing be kept secret? Tell me that. How could such a thing be kept secret?" I didn't answer. I had no answer. He was right, of course. Just as Baghdad had learned of my wealth and the fact that I'd earned it myself, so the city was bound, sooner or later, to know the story of me and my cousins. And if Baghdad knew the story, the rest of the world would know it too, in one way or another, in one shape or another. But why had my father himself been the first one to tell the tale? He said good would come of it. I didn't understand what he meant by that, not then. And though I asked him every night, what good has come of it yet? What good is it that you expect? He never really answered me. He only laughed and repeated, "Oh, my daughter, how could such a thing be kept secret? Tell me that. How could such a thing be kept secret?" And though I didn't understand what he meant by good coming, I believed him. I was as wakeful as night as I had ever been, but I didn't weep any more. Instead, I lay on my bed, waiting, waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew that I was waiting. At times, my whole body tingled with anticipation. Something was going to happen. Only it didn't happen. Days went by, weeks, a month, and nothing happened. Well, that's not true. Things happened. Things happened every day, but the thing, whatever it was, for which my heart was waiting, that did not happen. And then it was Amina's wedding. The festivals and ceremonies went on for a week. The final entertainment was even more magnificent than the one my parents had made for Sharifa. With great rejoicing, we ate, we drank, we sang, we danced all over our sprawling house. And then, amid laughter and celebration, all the guests led Amina through the streets to the house her bridegroom had built for her on the Kar, the other side of the river. After more feasting and revelry, we came home again. The guests drifted away, leaving our courtyards full of soiled plates and half-empty cups. The servants were too weary to clean up that night. It would all have to wait until morning. It had been the longest day of my life. I had awakened at dawn to make sure the feast was properly prepared. I had helped Amina dress and make up. I had greeted the guests and served many of them with my own hands. But now, so many hours later, though my legs ached and my arms drooped, I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep. My father, my mother, and Darira went to bed. My other sisters had long since departed with their husbands and their babies. I sat in the courtyard outside of my room, staring up at the stars. Usually, when I gazed at them, I remembered the desert and was filled with peace. It was different that night. I couldn't stop thinking. Amina had a husband. Soon it would be Darira's turn. My father and mother, in the course of time, would die. Then I would be alone. It was what I had chosen. I didn't want the marriages my sisters had. It was better to be alone. But it would have been best to have been with Mahmud. A wave of regret washed over me. My heart constricted in my chest, and I felt as if I were drowning. My mind couldn't believe what was happening to me. How could I succumb to an emotion as useless as regret? But my poor heart ignored my mind's scolding. It went right on aching. Tears coursed down my face like 2 rivers in spring. Somehow, the tears helped. The knife stopped turning inside of me. The agony was replaced by a sweeter pain. I could breathe again. I rose and walked across the courtyard, through the arched Iwan, across another court, and out through the gate into the street. No modest woman, no matter how heavily she had veiled her face, ever ventured into the street alone after dark. But I didn't care. It was so late that even immodest women were no longer abroad. Only Boran, sometimes called Nazir, who this night didn't know who she was. I traversed the route I had journeyed twice before in my life, once when I had left Baghdad, and once when I returned. The streets were silent, except for the occasional yowling of a dog and, further on, the quiet lapping of the river against its banks. I walked briskly, and I was glad of the exercise. I had missed it all these months since I had come home. I crossed the bridge and strode on, following the river until I had left the city behind me, and was walking now in open country, where the irrigated plain met the desert's edge. The air was cool and dry, and I breathed it deeply, swinging my arms as I moved. I knew I should turn and go back. Dawn was only an hour or two away. I ought to be home again before anyone in the household woke and missed me. But I wasn't worried about getting lost. The moon was still bright, and if I kept in my sight the line of growth that marked the river, I couldn't get lost. And it was so good to be out of doors, so good to be walking freely. If only I could ride again. If only there were some way I could keep a horse. If I put my mind to it, perhaps I would find a way. Moonlight faded, and the first faint streaks of morning lit the horizon. My mind was on the problem of a horse. It was difficult in the dim light to make out even an acacia tree unless it was no more than 10 paces in front of my nose. I didn't even see the string of camels until they were almost upon me. It was a small string, 6. 3 of the beasts carried goods on their backs. The other 3 carried men. A spasm of fear seized my stomach. What was this small caravan doing out in the desert before dawn? Either it had been traveling all night, or else it had packed up and moved out of its camp well before dawn. Neither action was the normal behavior of respectable merchants. What was their errand, that they would creep silently across rock and sand in the near darkness? But they must have been equally amazed at the sight of me, a woman, alone, walking in what was still the night. The camels halted. The man in the lead called out to me, "Peace be with you, traveler. In the name of the Prophet, is all well with you?" I recognized the voice. As soon as the first sounds had issued from his mouth, I knew the name of the man riding the lead camel. Tears sprang to my eyes. I was turning into a fountain. But these were such different tears from the ones I had shed a few hours before. "And to you, peace," I responded. I called out loudly, even though I couldn't keep my voice from trembling. "All is very well with me. All is very well now, my prince." All 3 of the camels-bearing men knelt instantly, as if in response to a common signal. The man in the lead was off his mount's back before the others had even removed their feet from the stirrups. He seemed to leap across the rocky patch of ground that separated us. Then I cried out, "Mahmud!" He pulled me to him. His arms went around me, hard and strong, squeezing the breath from my body so that I couldn't speak another word. I didn't want to speak another word. I clung to him as if I were drowning, as hungry for his presence as a starving man is for food. Alone in the desert, in the strange half-light that precedes dawn, we dared to embrace. But after a few moments, I pulled myself away. Now the sky was streaked with pink. I wanted to look at him. Was he the same Mahmud? No, not the same, any more than I was the same. He was thinner and harder, and there were little lines around his eyes. But he was Mahmud, nevertheless. Mahmud, my prince. "You have forgiven me," I said. It was a statement, not a question. His arms were still around me, and they pressed me close to him again. "Forgiven you?" he asked, smiling a little. "My heart, you still talk in riddles. What do I have to forgive you for?" "Deceiving you," I whispered. "You did what you had to do to save your family, to save yourself," he replied, his voice gruff. "I deceived myself. and because of that I almost lost you. When I think of the months, oh, my heart." His voice choked. He could say no more. As if from a great distance, I heard hudages creak and tails flick. Afterwards, for a long time, I heard nothing but the beating of my own heart and Mahmoud's. Minutes passed, many, many minutes, before we spoke again. But we couldn't embrace forever, not even the two of us, who had waited so long to share our embraces. Sunrise is rapid in the desert, and full morning light struck my eyes. "Mahmoud, I must return to my house," I said. "Indeed you must," he replied softly. His fingers reached up and pulled a strand of hair away from my face. "I think you had better make yourself presentable first. Your parents mustn't think ill of me before I've had a chance to explain." We washed our faces in the river, and I straightened my hair and my clothes as best I could. Mahmoud called out to Faris. He led the camels toward us. I mounted one, Mahmoud another, and the guide rode the third. Faris walked in front of the three beasts that carried supplies, leading them with a rope. I was full of questions, and so, no doubt, was Mahmoud. But we didn't talk much as we rode toward the city. It was enough to be together. We had years and years in which to tell each other stories. When we reached our courtyard, I sent the porter to wake my parents. They came to meet us side by side, their eyes still full of sleep. "Peace be with you," Mahmoud called out as soon as he saw them. He didn't want to waste a moment. He didn't want to give them time to misunderstand. "I am Mahmoud, son of the Wali of Tira." "And to you, peace," my father replied. "Your presence does honor to my humble house." But he didn't sound or look the least bit surprised. He behaved like a man receiving a guest he'd been expecting for a long time. "My unceremonious arrival at such an unconscionable hour surely requires an explanation," Mahmoud began, in the formal, faintly pompous manner which, I was amused to realize, he still adopted when he found himself in a slightly uncomfortable situation. "Especially," he added, "as I come, unexpectedly, in the company of your daughter." "I know your explanations," my father replied bluntly. "You love her. You wish to marry her. My only question is, why did it take you so long to get here?" My father may not have been surprised at Mahmoud, but Mahmoud was surprised at my father. "She told you about me," he blurted out. "Not in words," my father said. "I didn't know your name. But I know enough now that I can wait for your story. Come, my son. Rest, eat, then we'll talk." A sigh escaped Mahmoud's lips. He relaxed and obeyed. Later, we sat in the shaded inner court, eating bread, fruit, and cheese, while Mahmoud told us how he had found me. We were all there, my mother, my father, Darira, and me. It was as if Mahmoud were a member of the family. "I followed Nazir Buran to Alexandria," my prince explained. "But it was too late." He turned to me as he spoke. "I docked just a few hours after you had sailed. I was disappointed, but I didn't despair. In Alexandria, they knew of a wealthy woman traveling alone except for her 2 servants. You had done a lot of business in the city before you left. You'd made your mark. Along the wharves, it wasn't hard to discover that you'd gone to Cyprus. But the journey to Cyprus was another matter. We were becalmed, and then we sprang a leak. We had to put in for repairs. A 5-day journey took us 3 weeks. His voice grew bleak with remembered anguish. As he told the story, he was reliving the hope and the frustration that had racked him alternately. or even at the same moment during the months he had sought me. My heart ached for what he had suffered, even though it was over now. I had had my work and my family to occupy me, and still I had felt a misery so deep it had kept me awake during the long, dark hours of the night. How much worse it must have been for him, who had no distractions, whose mind was occupied with only one concern, the goal of his quest, me. But my heart was full of joy, too. It's a wonderful thing to know someone loves you best. No one interrupted Mahmoud. My father leaned forward, eager to catch every word. Darira's eyes were round with wonder, and she didn't take them off Mahmoud's face for a moment. My mother's hands for once were idle, her spindle lying in her lap. In Cyprus I lost your trail completely. Mahmoud's voice was low and full of sorrow. You didn't stay there long, I suppose, and by the time I got there you were only half remembered. Other travelers had come through, perhaps even another woman accompanied by servants. The people I spoke to were confused. Some of them seemed to recall someone resembling my description of you, but they told conflicting stories about where she had gone after she had left Cyprus. One said Sidon, another said Jaffa. I chose Jaffa. Sidon was too close to Tira, I thought. He shook his head emphatically. A waste of time. No one in Jaffa had heard of a woman merchant traveling with 2 servants. So then I went to Sidon. Your trail was cold. You'd been there some weeks ago, some said, but no one knew where you'd gone. I wandered aimlessly from city to city. Sometimes I heard of a wealthy woman, a woman who did business. No one ever knew her name. No one ever knew where she was from. They had ideas about where she had gone, but no one was ever sure. Sometimes I heard she was old and traveling entirely alone. Sometimes I heard she was young and traveling with a huge retinue. Whatever I heard, it was never quite right. It was never quite you. But it was enough to keep me going, to keep me looking. At last I came to Iconium. Iconium, my mother cried, amazed. Iconium, so far away. Yes, so far away, Mahmoud agreed. And there, in a caravanserai, I sat with a merchant. I made a habit of striking up friendships with merchants or sailors or caravan chiefs. They know more than other people. I thought of Gindar and Abu Sinan and Jiha. With their knowledge, they had changed my life. And this merchant told me a strange tale. Now Mahmoud's voice took on the intonation of a storyteller entertaining a crowd in the bazaar. He laughed as he told it to me. He had heard it, he said, in Antioch. It was about a woman as clever as Princess Scheherazade. All by herself, she had made a fortune in trade, and then she had returned home to achieve a marvelously appropriate revenge on cousins who had insulted her when she was poor. What a woman, he cried when he was done with his story. If the 3 wives I already have weren't just about as much as I can manage, I'd seek her hand myself. For the first time since he'd begun his tale, Mahmoud smiled. When I listened to him, my heart was so full of exultation I could hardly keep from shouting. He thought he was entertaining me with a story, as Scheherazade entertained the Sultan Shirir. But I knew immediately that he was talking about a real person. I knew immediately that the woman he spoke of could be no other than my beloved. Listen, I said to that merchant, you couldn't have her even if you sought her. She is already promised. Mahmoud paused and turned his full gaze upon me. It may have been foolish of me, he said quietly, but I knew from all that had passed between us, and from the White Queen that you had left behind for me. I knew that you loved me. I was confident enough to believe that, loving me, you wouldn't take another man, not if you could avoid it. And If there was a woman in the world who could avoid it, that woman was you. I wore no veil. After all that had passed between us, to what purpose would I have hidden my face from him? Even my mother couldn't insist upon it, though she and Daira had covered theirs. So I didn't have to answer him. The smile I gave him was enough. Mahmoud returned to his story. I asked the man if his informant had mentioned the name of this woman or her father's name. Those things he couldn't tell me. But he said the woman was one of 7 daughters, and the cousins she had tricked were 7 sons, and they, all of them, were said to live in Baghdad. And so I came here. I came here like the wind. Once more he addressed himself to me directly. We were too close to the city last night for me to sleep. That's why you found me in the desert long before dawn. Something told you I was coming. That's why you were there too. Oh, Mahmoud, I exclaimed. Can the son of the Wali of Tira marry a woman whose name is tossed around in bazaars and khans? But Boran, Mahmoud replied, his eyes, his mouth, his whole face smiling. If your story hadn't been known, my hair could have been white before I found you. I would have, sooner or later. That I know. My wanderings would eventually have brought me to Baghdad. After I'd exhausted every port, I would have begun journeying inland, and sooner or later I would have come here. But that might not have been for years. It's because of the story that I found you as quickly as I did. His hand reached out and grasped mine. Besides, how could such a thing be kept secret? Tell me that. How could such a thing be kept secret? My father's words rang out full and clear across the courtyard. That's right, O son-in-law, he said. How could such a thing be kept secret? And so it was that Boran, daughter of the poor shopkeeper known as Abu al-Banat, became the bride of Mahmud, Prince of Tira. For many years they ruled the city together. So great was their wisdom and understanding that under their joint stewardship, the city prospered beyond anything it had ever known before, or has been privileged to experience since. And when they grew old, Boran and Mahmud made sure that their children knew the strange and wonderful story of how they had come together. Because, Boran said, children should not think that the blessings of God are theirs by right, or come to them simply for the asking. Boran and Mahmud lived to celebrate the weddings of their grandchildren. They died within hours of each other, and when they were laid to rest, tears were shed for them, not only in Tira, not only in Baghdad, but in all the lands Caliph and Sultan ruled. One extraordinarily ancient and enormously fat man followed their funeral procession to the edge of the grave. Standing there, he was overheard to murmur to himself, "The ways of God are beyond human understanding," he said. "The father of sons lived to rue the day that they were born, and the father of daughters lived to become the companion of counselors and kings." The end.